Economics here once again, and today I'm bringing you chapter 2 of the 100-year life, this little literacy review that we're currently working on. Now, can I just say, ladies and gentlemen, those of you who are doing OCR A2 Economics, this chapter 2 has a lot of great stuff which relates to the labour market theory, which is in your A2 textbook. So things which I'm going to be mentioning in this video, such as, for example, dependency ratios, participation rates, all very well illustrated in this book and in this particular chapter 2. Nice practical examples for you to get stuck into. So there's actually quite a lot in this chapter 2. I'll try and keep this as short as I can without sort of missing out the key info. But this particular chapter focuses on what you and I will need to do as we live longer, what we will need to do in order to finance our retirement and our pension. What age we'll possibly be able to retire, how much we'll need to save through our lifetime. And it really is, it's quite worrying reading really in some respects. However, remember, we must consider this as always a gift rather than a curse. So, the chapter opens by telling us that obviously if you live longer, there are a couple of options that you have in order to prepare for your retirement. You can either save more proportionally of your income, so rather than saving, as was back in the day, if you were born in say 1940s, 1950s, according to the book, you would need to save maybe around 4.5–5% of your income per annum, and that would see you nicely with at least a pension of about 50% of your final income. Nowadays, however, that's not the case, and you're probably looking at maybe having to save something around 20% annually of your income. Well, that is a very, very difficult thing to do nowadays, to save that sort of proportion of one's income. So, if that's not viable, then of course the other option is that you simply work longer. Now, to an extent that is also possible, but of course as you get older, things deteriorate in terms of your body and things wear out. You're perhaps no longer as agile and alert as you once were, and perhaps cognitively you also lose a little bit of that mental agility as well. So that's also not going to be possible for everybody. But for most of you, you will either have to do one or other or both of those things in order to prepare for your retirement and your pension. Now, of course, how much you save over your lifetime does depend upon a number of different things. So, for example, how much of a pension do you think that you would like to have when you retire? What will the rate of return be, the ROR, on any investments that you make? Now, of course, these are things which are very difficult looking and forecasting into the future. These are very difficult to predict. But perhaps you might go to our friends at Brew & Dolphin, the wealth managers, and you may speak with them and you may find out how much you need to save per annum. That, of course, depends on your attitude to risk as well. Some of you might be more risk averse than others. And of course, the less risky your investment, the less return you're likely to see on it. You don't know, particularly if you're still at school or university at the moment, you do not know what your rate of income growth will be. You don't even know probably what job you're going to be in. So again, that's difficult to predict. And maybe the age at which you wish to retire, that will change over your lifetime, particularly over your working life. As you have children and your family circumstances change and so on, or perhaps you might inherit money, or perhaps you might want to leave a vast estate to your own children, and again that might require you to work longer. So there are all sorts of things to throw into the melting pot here in terms of when you can retire. But let's turn to facts now, ladies and gentlemen. It is a fact that state pensions, as we know them, they are slowly disappearing. These pay-as-you-go, they're called. In other words, taxpayers today are paying taxes which are fueling the pensions, the state pensions of pensioners today. Now, of course, this is unlike a funded scheme whereby you pay into a pension pot and that is then invested and that yields you a return. It's simply you put the money in tax, and then that is paid out to the pensioners in the form of the state pension. Now, when we have changing demographics as we have nowadays, where we have life expectancy going up, birth rates are on the decline. And as a consequence of that, that means that you have less money going into the tax pot, but more people demanding the state pension. And of course, therefore, something has to give. And at the moment, that something which is giving is that the age at which people are retiring is going up and up and up, and there's reforms to state pensions and so on. Now, dependency ratios. This is something which is mentioned in your A2 labour markets section of OCR. And the dependency ratio, this refers to the number of people who are currently working, sort of the tax base, which is supporting the number of people who are claiming the state pension. So it used to be maybe 50, 60 years ago that for every 10 people in work, they were supporting one pensioner. Nowadays, it's more like for every 10 people in work, they're supporting maybe 7 or 8 pensioners. And so the dependency ratio is much greater than it has been before, and will become unsustainable if this divergence between life expectancy and birth rates continues to diverge. Now, of course, government reform of pension schemes is slow, because that is like turkeys voting for Christmas, ladies and gentlemen. Why would pensioners nowadays, or people who are approaching to retirement, why would they vote for example, an abandonment and an abolition or a means-tested sort of state pension scheme? That's, it's not really sensible, and therefore that's like turkeys voting for Christmas. And so government reform in this area is very slow. However, it is the case that you'll certainly have to work longer and retire later. On the other hand, company pension schemes, which are very, very expensive, they've been very quick to reform. So the whole notion of a final salary pension scheme, these are all being abandoned. My own teacher's pension, for example, it used to be the case that you used to be able to retire with a nice lump sum and you'd be on a final salary pension scheme. Now that is all changing, and now it's gone to average salary pension scheme and so on. And I'm sure it will change as we move into the future. But these are quick to change because they are so costly for firms and for large public sector organisations. So if the state pension is getting pushed further and further into the distance, and if defined pension schemes are becoming less generous, then of course the onus is on you, the saver, to save more for your retirement. And as I mentioned at the top of the board, that means you may have to save something like 20% of your income per annum in order to receive a pension, which is around about half of your final salary. So the onus is very much on your savings, which is why we then see participation rates globally are going up. Now, by participation rates, we mean the number of people who are economically active. And that is going up because of this affordability issue with regard to retirement and pension. So the solution, of course, would be that you form an economy of scale. You form an economy of scale with a partner or a spouse. And if there are two of you working in the household, then that obviously makes things financially much easier, and consequently much easier probably to retire at an earlier age. But we're certainly, as it says in the chapter, as it comes to a conclusion, this particular chapter, rest in peace, the three-stage life cycle. This whole notion of the Modigliani life cycle hypothesis, those of you who study AS economics as well, you'll know that that's in some of the very early sections of the AS textbook. The three-stage life cycle hypothesis, whereby you have your education, you have your work life, and then you retire and you have your pension. Well, that really is going to be shelved due to this 100-year life and this longevity of life. It will no longer be the case that one phase of education is enough. As mentioned in chapter 1, you'll need to be constantly retraining. There'll be no more gone are the days of a job for life. You'll maybe have 2, 3 different careers over the course of your working life. Gone are the days when you'll be able to retire in your sort of mid-50s, early 60s. Perhaps you'll have to work well into your 70s. So this whole notion of the 3-stage life cycle is certainly going to change as well, and you'll have to train and retrain, etc. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is chapter 2, all about what you're going to need to do in order to put in place the provisional requirements to enjoy a nice and happy, fruitful retirement. So we'll leave it at that, ladies and gentlemen. That's chapter 2. Bye for now.